Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Code to Cloud. I got a special guest on today. You know, I've really enjoyed watching the work that this guy's done in the past, right? Especially the platforms and tools that he's built and developed over the years. And some of the most exciting things around Dagger as well, which we're going to get onto shortly. But Solomon, welcome to the show and thank you for coming on. How's it going, man?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's going great. I'm ready to talk about cloud native and all sorts of fun stuff.
I know, right? I mean, you've got such a rich history in this. Like you know, literally pioneered a lot of it and made it took a lot of the pain away from developers such as myself. So, I'm pretty excited about this conversation. But I just wanted to touch on your origin story a little bit. I like to call it an origin story, right? It's better than a career background, but it
Like
sounds
my
more.
villain origin story.
Well, it's like X-Men, right? Like Wolverine, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, do you just want to tell folks about what you do, how you got there a little bit, what energizes you?
Sure. Let's see. I'm going to try not go too far back. Yeah. So I'm Solomon. I'm the co-founder of a startup called Dagger.io, and before that, I was the co-founder of Docker. And Docker is the project I'm known for so far, hoping to beat that with Dagger. And I've been working on Dagger for almost 5 years now, and previously worked on Docker for 10 years. And when I started working on Docker, I was living in France. I grew up in France, even though I don't sound French. I am very French. And went to school there, engineering school. Went to a school called Epitech. That was very hands-on. Straight out of high school. So a different path from the traditional, pretty rigid, pretty prestigious engineering programs in France that date back hundreds of years, and you learn how to make rockets or bridges or, nuclear plants or whatever. And I went through this very different program where you just code all day. And I just loved that. So I did that 5 years of that. And then pretty quickly, you get a knack for just building things, and you just get this feeling that you can just do things, And so that led me to, after a few jobs, pretty early, just kind of quitting and trying to do my own startup, basically. And that took a long time, but eventually became Docker.
That's amazing. I would never have thought you were French in a million years.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Well,
For someone that actually had a lot of French influence growing up, obviously England and France is pretty close, right?
yeah.
I would never have thought you were en français, right? So, but yeah,
We can continue the interview with the accent if you want. You will be more believable.
I mean, we might get some comments about that accent, but yeah, that's pretty hilarious. But yeah, no, that's amazing. I love the fact that you mentioned that quit a few jobs, right? Like, especially being in the European system. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about there. It's like a set laid out track, right? Like you go through these stages, right?
Yeah.
And you sort of get promoted or elevated,
Yeah.
right, out the back of those programs.
And I didn't go very far into that system, like I graduated from this, with my master's degree actually with a degree that was not officially recognized as a master's degree in France because that school was so weird and new. But, 5 years after high school, I graduated with all this programming experience, and that was in 2006. So, and then 2009, actually 2008 is when I started working on my own thing. So I lasted 2 years. So I didn't get a lot of experience, going through this track. But yeah, it is very, the best way I can describe it is as a young software engineer, a young techie, at least back then, 2006, 7, 8, in France, there's this mythical distant land called Silicon Valley in California,
Yes.
and all these, big impressive things happen over there, and the people over there, they just distant, and you assume just different in every way. They breathe a different air. They probably eat different food. They just kind of live. It might as well be another planet. Is my point. And at the time, there were blogs. I remember reading Mark Andreessen's blog, the blog of a VC called Fred Wilson, based out of New York, and the early Hacker News, of course. And you just get the sense that you live on one planet, and those awesome tech people live on another planet, Planet Tech. There's no shuttle between the two, and the professional experience is so different because, like, my experience as a young techie was, working at in the tech department of a relatively non-tech company, right? I didn't know anyone in my cohort that worked at a startup. That was not a thing. Or even at a software product company, a company whose business is to sell software products. That didn't really exist. You did consulting or you did IT, and that was the norm. And I did a little bit of both. But you read Hacker News. You're on a Linux mailing list looking at this cool emerging container tech. You tinker in your basement, actually in your mom's basement in my case.
Well, yeah, obviously.
And then you go to work, and the CEO of the company is like, "Oh yeah, you're the tech guy, right? Can you fix my printer? I'm late for a meeting." So it's just a very different universe. Anyway,
I'm getting a lot of flashbacks, really, because literally, it was the same in the United Kingdom, right? Software companies were very far and few between, and everything came out of Silicon Valley, right, or Redmond, effectively, right, from a software point of view. And you were like just watching, to your point, like blog sites, tech news websites, right? There was like a open source community starting to bubble in Europe a lot. Like, I don't know about you, but I think it was around that time there was a lot of like distributions being developed, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite friends was like, was it Mandrivia or Mandrake? That was
I think both existed.
Yeah. So
totally, but it was very different from the open source communities today because it was very clearly rooted in the original free software, FSF movement. So there was a very strong political angle to it. And it, of course, also tech, but it wasn't a neutral tech community that you just joined for the fun of the code. You had to kind of, if you wanted to interact or participate in any way that wasn't very superficial, you kind of had to kind of pledge loyalty to not just the code, but the values around the code. And I remember not being super attracted to that because it felt like, to my techie mind, like if I want to do politics, I'll go do politics. But isn't code just code? So it was a lot of, back then it was a lot of software must be free, GPL versus the Linux world versus the Microsoft world, and you got to pick a side. I'm like, I don't know, like pick a side for what? I just want to build cool things and ideally get a job. So there wasn't really anything else in my recollection. There wasn't another place for me that I felt like I could be part of.
I completely, like for me, it was the same. It was like, you try and get into those communities, you basically had to earn your stripes, right? It's like you had to have gone on like, an underground mission for 2 years, preaching and just like, evangelizing open source software. But yeah, it was very political, right? And I even remember governments at the time in Europe were trying to move away from Microsoft as well as like a political stance because they were going to go open source,
Right.
and then 5 years later they'd have to go back because of Office, right? It was very much like a line in the sand, right? You had to be a purist. But no, again, like that resonates a lot with me because I was in the same circles, right? Trying to get in. But so how did the dream of like the Docker initiation idea, right? From
Mm-hmm.
then you from France, then obviously coming over to the US, I take it, right? How did that come about, and how did you get the chance with here's my idea, Docker, and how did you start to get it out there?
Yeah, it was a long and painful process, and I had no experience whatsoever. And there was no straight line. But I think what led to it succeeding in the end was mostly just such extreme lack of experience in IFT that I didn't know what was impossible. And because working, growing up in the tech world in France in 2008, surrounded by this barren land, this sort of this environment that was not at all fit to develop and nurture tech ambitions, you kind of develop a resistance to it, I guess. It either breaks you or it makes you stronger. I think one or the other. And so in my case, I just got used to people saying in different ways that nothing I did would matter. I remember someone very clearly saying that I was sort of looking for a mentor, and there's one particular person told me, I was talking about Silicon Valley, something that was that had just been launched. I don't remember. That I was very excited about the what would later be called cloud computing. Amazon, Google were starting to talk about the amazing infrastructure that they had invented. Like a completely new way to run software, not on one server but on thousands of them, and all the technology and tooling that's required for that. That was sort of happening behind closed doors, but then they started publishing papers and open sourcing some of it, and I was not closely following, but I was getting glimpses, echoes, and I would share my excitement about that, and that maybe, it gave me, instinctively ideas for something to build on top, or something better than that piece, just sort of this emulation. I felt pulled into participating, And I remember this feedback I got was someone basically saying, but these people like you and me don't do things like that. And I remember it really struck me, and it made me really angry, actually, because I was, it felt like putting a limit on what I could do. I didn't feel right at all, but that was my environment. And so anyway, out of stubbornness, I just kept working on it anyway, and finding whatever vehicle I could to continue. So initially, I started like a bootstrap, what you would call now a bootstrapped business. Just consulting seems like too big of a word for what we did, really, but like a local boutique services company, like IT development, whatever you wanted to throw at us, we would do. And then that gave me a little bit of a budget to hire some students from the school I graduated from, and build this little team. And we would do our contracts, and on the side we would just hack on cool open source tech, in the hope that somehow these two things would sort of somehow amplify each other and lead to success. And then that's where we started working on container tech. That was my personal obsession. And then eventually I realized, okay, consulting just eats all your time. They don't product, tech work and consulting work don't amplify each other in this situation. They compete for your limited time. And so eventually, I just sort of made this decision to stop taking new contracts, and which effectively gave me a deadline to either find a way to succeed on the product side, or just move on, stop doing this. And on the second or third try, I got us accepted into Y Combinator. And Y Combinator, 2010, flew us in for an interview, and there's a whole story there, but eventually we got in, and packed my bags and moved to Mountain View at the time, and that was it. Never came back.
That's quite a common story, right? Like the, your plan B became your plan A, right? So you removed all the sort of safety mechanism. I'm going to call it safety mechanisms because when you're consulting, there's not much safety in that. But you hear it a lot with a lot of CTOs as well. That sort of, I call it, traversing the chasm, right? So you're like a senior engineer. You're doing consultancy work, you're doing engineering, but you got this product, and then you become more of a product like owner or product manager, right? And setting the technical strategy there. So that's quite a transition for folks, right? Like you said, right? You hired some folks from your old school, which is, I mean, they must have been ecstatic when you gave them a phone call, right? Or hit them up over email. But yeah.
Well, not really, because I was just a random graduate a few years older than them, just saying, "Hey, you want an internship?" Basically, we'll work on cool tech. It was, no one was ecstatic, but we all had a lot of fun because they got to, build cool things, and it was more like a lab.
Yeah.
But yeah, this isn't, I'm not. And later, when Docker actually succeeded, we hired a lot of people along the way from France. And specifically from my school, and that was a very different experience. And that was that. Then there was definitely a feeling of, yes, this is my chance. This is my opportunity to cross the bridge. The opportunity no one gave me back then, right?
I feel like there's a very European thing. It's not like we're taking chunks out of our European culture here, but I remember it was an interview with, I forgot the guy's name. He was British. Anyway, he was the chief designer for Apple, right? And I remember watching him on TV, and I must have been about 15, 16, right, with my parents. And he was in
Gotta be
San
Johnny
Francisco.
Ive, right?
I think it was, right? And he said, do you know what? He said, I moved here to San Francisco, and, I don't know if he developed a MacBook, right? Or I can't remember which product line it was, but he said, ideas are so precious here, and they're so invested in, right? He said that was the biggest difference. He said, when I was back in the UK, like, it's the land of no. Like, is
The
that going
land
to
of
work?
no.
Really?
Oh, you should try.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Who's done it before? No one. Well, it's never going to work then, right?
Mm.
It's like pessimistic, unfortunately, right? And to your point, I just remember that stuck in my head. Like, and as soon as I moved out here, obviously I didn't move to the States, but as soon as I moved out here, there was a complete culture difference. So if you had like a good idea, and people thought, even if it was just 40% looks like it was going to work, people normally rally behind you and get behind you. That was a massive culture difference to me. And it sort of gives you some self-belief, right?
Yeah. And at the same time, you're surrounded by people, at least here in Silicon Valley, that are kicking ass. And, like, there's always someone working harder than you, who made more money than you, more ambitious than you. And so it's sort of these two tracks of general support and positivity and assuming it's possible, and also major pressure to be better, because every day you interact or cross paths with someone who makes you think, okay, I gotta level up here. And those two forces together are very powerful.
What did somebody say to me? A great mentor of mine. He said, when you're surrounded by individuals like that, he said, imagine it being like at the gym, and you're always trying to lift more weights than the next person. That was the analogy they used. I thought that was great. I thought that was a great
true
analogy, right? It was like,
very true.
So
for someone, since you have a cloud native community, and I'm guessing a lot of the people listening have a systems engineering background or are familiar with systems, so lower layers of the stack, let's say. It was even more striking for me, the difference, because there's, aside from the business of startups and the optimism and the ambition and all of that, there's just so much understanding and respect for the tech all the way down the stack. Like, you will routinely interact with people that you can actually talk to about what you're doing, and you don't have to oversimplify. If anything, they're gonna push you to in more detail. They're actually going to challenge you in your actual area of expertise, and that's a really good feeling.
Sort of come away from some of those conversations going, did I say the right thing? Did I did I validate it in the right way? But it always makes you better at articulating the conversation. That's what I find anyway. Like, they just want to understand, right?
So anyway, that's I guess you wanted the origin story. That's the origin story plus some random observations about Europe versus Americas for tech people.
I mean, it's great, right? With Docker, I mean, did I hear right? You were at a conference trying to talk about something else, and actually Docker was like a pitch stage kind of thing, right? Where you were just talking about it a very short amount of time, but it generated a lot of energy in the room.
Oh yeah, you're talking about the moment where we launched it.
Because I feel it's an absolutely fascinating story, and I just wanted to touch on it quickly.
Yeah. So this is 2013. Note that 2010 is when we got into Y Combinator and moved to Silicon Valley. But then 2013 is when Docker actually, the name Docker appeared, and this open source project was launched that then took off. And so by 2013, we're 3 years into our journey in the US, plus another 2 years struggling in France. So I'm 5 years in, right? And still made enormous amounts of progress compared to being stuck in the desert, like we were just talking about, but still nowhere near the kind of visibility Docker has today. So that 2013 changed everything for us again, right? And the way it happened is that we were at the time running this business called .cloud, which was a hosted platform as a service offering. So competing with Heroku, Google App Engine. So it combined tooling for easy deployment of your application and hosting to actually run it in production. And it turned out to be a difficult business for everyone. Like none of our competitors did very well. And we were, even in that generally struggling category, we were a solid second tier because we didn't have the clout and the flashy marketing and the deep pockets required to give developers basically free hosting. Generous free tiers were the norm, subsidized by overly optimistic VC money. And really the big winner in that phase of the market ended up being AWS, because all these VCs and VC-backed developer tooling startups like .cloud ended up spending a lot of their VC money building a top of funnel for AWS. So you would start your project on .cloud or Heroku or like a million competitors. And then you would get a lot of free stuff, very generous, like great experience. You can ship fast. It's pretty cheap. And then eventually, there's a funnel. A lot of those projects disappear, but then those that succeed, they become real companies or, real projects within a bigger company with a real budget. And then they start scaling. And when they start scaling, that's when the provider is supposed to start making money, because in exchange for all this value and this great experience and this velocity, you add margins to the raw cost of compute and storage. And in the beginning, it's worth it. And then if you grow really large, at some point, there's a conversation internally, and the CFO asks, why are we spending so much money? And there's a new head of engineering and or a new DevOps person, and DevOps person says, I can do that on top of Amazon. And so they go and rebuild it on top of the basic building blocks, the compute and storage. And AWS is right there with more volume, better cost, more regions, and it becomes just a commodity infrastructure game, which startups cannot win. So that was the business. That was the situation we were in. So it was just like a slog, right? I think we barely hit 1 million ARR, and the growth was just not exciting. And it felt like we were not fighting on our own turf. We were not differentiating. But we had this tech, this container tech under the hood powering it that really no one else had in this form. We were really pushing the envelope on that tech. But it didn't matter in this market. You know, what mattered was how many cores do I get in the free tier? You know, how slick is the UI? And we weren't as good at that stuff. So anyway, long story short, out of frustration, I started a side project to sort of take all the tech we had built and sort of repackage it in an open source project that others could use as a component in the hope of popularizing our tech and making a name for ourselves. And you know, it worked basically. So anyway, I didn't even answer your question. The way we introduced that to the world was accidental. We had started showing prototypes in private demos to people we knew. And then in tiny private meetups, like 10 people, 15 people. But, you know, we would bring like 1 or 2 people at a time. And we would have them join our repo and our IRC channel at the time. And sort of build a little private community to incubate, to be ready for a later launch. And then I thought, okay, let's pick up the pace a little bit. Let's go give a lightning talk at a conference. Not a main stage, but just like a little lightning talk about this niche topic, you know, Linux containers. And so we got a lightning talk at PyCon 2013, down in, I forget, somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it turns out lightning talks at PyCon are on the main stage, so like big room.
Wow.
And you get these 10 minutes. And separately, we had a booth because that we had paid for to advertise .cloud in this slog of business that we were in. And so we had a marketing team ready to talk about .cloud. And then I went and gave that talk about Docker. And then people responded very, very strongly and basically flooded our booth to talk about Docker some more. And our marketing team, I think, didn't even know what Docker was, or they did. They knew there was a side project, but you know, they couldn't talk about it. So that was a first signal that we got that this was different. It was qualitatively different. The way people reacted was just very different, and it was really us. It was our thing. No one else did that. And then we had to rush a launch because then someone posted the teaser landing page on Hacker News, and it was, you know, it stayed there a long time. People were talking about it, but it wasn't launched. It wasn't open source. So then, you know, there was a solid chunk of people basically complaining that it was vaporware, that wasn't available, not open source. And so we rushed to open source it, and 2 weeks later we did, and yeah, and then it kept growing from there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think that's an incredible story, right? Like your business started off doing one thing, right? Effectively trying to compete with hyperscalers, right? Essentially, right? You know, Amazon was very dominant at that time, but the side project, as soon as you turn the taps on, I remember the first time I saw it, like, one, I was like, wow, this is like a new era, because it wasn't a big company that was producing this, right? It was a company I've never heard of before, and even like the icon, right, of the whale and everything else, right? Like, it was completely different from the mainstream software that we had to that day. And I didn't have to put all this infrastructure together to start developing for containers, right? And, you know, it's been so instrumental, so many application developments now, right? It's used everywhere. So, you know, kudos to that.
Thank you.
But yeah, I really want to get into the Dagger piece though, right? I feel like we've talked about the origin story a lot. So a few months back, yeah, it was about 3 months back, I heard about Dagger, right? I think it was on one of the CNCF feeds. And like, we got an engineering team at a Code to Cloud. I'm like, I always trying to introduce them to a piece of technology they've never come across before. I was like, look, squad, right? I mean, he's going to look at Dagger and they're like, what's Dagger? I said, look. And I gave them the brief that you've just given them. And I was like, it's going to fix your deployments before they even go wrong, right? Or it's going to try and achieve that. And they were like, how? And I was like, it's just, they containerized pipelines, right? And they were like, okay. And they went away and they've all fallen in love with it to the point where we were chatting just before the show, right? And I'll let you get into Dagger and give us an overview, right? But even on we've obviously got like a platform engineering hub on GitHub, which is open source, right? It's everything that we learn, and we're just trying to, try and expand that and scale it out to everybody out there. It's taken up a very large section now of our CI/CD section.
That's
right?
amazing.
So we're really stoked about that, right? But yeah, do you just want to give an overview of Dagger, like, and the future plans around it? And
Sure. So, just like Docker, Dagger is a multifaceted project, and it's a little new and different. So there's different ways to explain it. At its core, it's an engine, an execution engine for software that is not shaped like regular apps, but shaped in a graph, specifically a DAG, which is a graph where, boxes and arrows. If you can structure your software as boxes and arrows, the boxes being objects, pieces of data, and then the arrows being functions that transform that data into something else, and then you keep doing it like that. Then Dagger is like an operating system for running that kind of software. CI/CD pipelines are the perfect example of that kind of software, because a pipeline, or workflows, any sort of workflow, test pipeline, build pipeline, deployment pipeline, those are all best modeled as DAGs, boxes and arrows. A build system is a DAG. Make files are executed as a DAG. And so the problem with DAGs is that they're just different kinds of software. It's actually a distributed system problem, because each node in that graph it could be running independently. So it's very parallelizable. These systems have all sorts of interesting properties that regular platforms just can't help you with. So all this to say, CI/CD specifically is so painful in most teams because it's taped together with shell scripts, YAML, 1,000 different tools and config languages that don't really understand each other. So you're just kind of gluing them together. Parts of it are tied to proprietary platforms. You have to commit your code, push to some remote server, and wait for the server to tell you made a mistake. You can't run it locally because it's literally only available on that proprietary service, right? And the result of all that is pain. Iteration loops that are too slow, unreliable builds, things are just generally bloated and expensive. That's sort of the normal status quo in most engineering teams, especially as they grow. It's just normal to have to deal with that crap. But the reason that all that crap exists in the first place is because all these pipelines you should think of them as software. It is literally an application. I like to describe it like a factory. It's like a software factory. The code's ready. Then it's got to go through this very complicated process that results in a new version being alive, right? And back when applications were smaller and simpler, you could do that by hand with a few scripts. But now that applications are so big and complicated, they need to go through this factory. And it's not like you can buy this factory at the factory store, right? Each software product has its own unique factory. This pipeline does that, my build works that way. And then we have this process here and we have that. If you think of it as software, then the problem is there's no good platform to run it. So what do? You start from the platform you have, which is Linux, which is 50 years old. It doesn't know what a DAG is. It doesn't know what a Git repo is. There's no built-in caching. There's no, it's not distributed by nature, right? So you just sort of fill the gap with all these tools and scripts that we have. So anyway, long story short, of course, we use container technology for this. You mentioned it. But what we do is we take these messy workflows and we turn them into clean software running on a clean platform with all the features you would expect from modern software running on a modern platform. Like you can run it locally, you can test it, you can observe what it's doing. There's built-in tracing. You can break it down into components, and you can say, "Oh, that piece is cool. I'll reuse it for my other project, or I'll share it with you. Hey, I built the ideal, Go builder. Like I fine-tuned it. It's perfect. Here it is. And you can reuse it in your project. So it's just normal things that you expect of a software platform that the DevOps community, the platform engineering community, does not get to enjoy for CI/CD. Anyway, I gave you the long version, but
I absolutely love it because we've already started to see the benefits immediately. Because, to your point, we deployed it locally, so we got like a local pipeline, right, on your laptop, similar to like the whole Docker thing, right? Built the container and testing it before I've even got it to GitHub, right? And I've been there so many times, right? If I think about my DevOps days, right, like even when the Terraform code worked locally, right, in my CLI, as soon as I pushed it to the pipeline, it would fail. And that's where I see this, right? And I wanted to touch on like the Daggerverse as well, which, to your point, is I've built this builder package, I fine tuned it. Here you go, right, to get you up and running twice as fast, right? Do you just want to talk a little bit about that as well? Because the community, the community culture that you've built around Dagger is really commendable, by the way. So, like,
thank you.
I really want to touch on that. In a
There's
few minutes.
both aspects, both that specific feature you mentioned, like the module system and Daggerverse. I'll explain what that is, and the open source community aspect, which is something we invest a lot in. Both of these are connected to my history with Docker. Right? They're in a lot of ways, Dagger it's not a replacement for Docker. It's not even a better version of Docker. It's just what Docker should build next. What I would build next if I were still running that Docker. Right? It's to me, it's the obvious natural continuation of applying container technology. And that seems so obvious to me that I'm surprised no one else did it. And I think this is where our broad cloud native community, which in a lot of ways is the container community, right?
Sure.
I'm going to, dare I say, the Docker / Kubernetes community. It's sort of like this weird conflation of developers and infrastructure people, but mostly infrastructure people. But like we started it with Docker, and then the Kubernetes project, was a major event that continued it and took that movement in a slightly different direction. And for a little while, if you remember the history, there was some friction there. There was some pulling in different directions. And I think the way it's been remembered and explained is not completely wrong, but misleading, because it was simplified to, startup versus like a business competition problem, like Docker versus other companies, or open source versus business, right? But I think really a lot of the conflict was around, it was actually about technical vision and design, not so much about business. And business flows from that. We at Docker had a very specific vision for what we wanted to do with container technology. And it was not the same, not completely shared by companies like Red Hat and Google and Microsoft. And I think when Docker just sort of exited the scene and, continued existing, but stopped being the driving force for innovation, right? Like we shipped the Docker engine, then we shipped Docker Compose, Docker Hub, Docker Desktop. And that's what stuck, right? and then Kubernetes, and the whole Kubernetes ecosystem kind of took over from there. What's the difference? Kubernetes is not developer focused. It's all about infrastructure. It's all about the data center. It's technology by data center people for data center people. And I'm come from that world, resonates with me, but there was something else about Docker and what we were pushing for that was lost. And there's a reason developers generally just don't go the cloud native events unless they're developing data center software, right? Because it's not for them. The Docker was for them.
Yeah, they want to ship, right? So
yeah. So I think Kubernetes took container tech in a specific direction, and it focused on infrastructure. But what I've always wanted to build on this container technology is a platform, something like an actual operating system, something that a developer can say, not just, oh, I'm using it to build my thing, but I'm building my application on this. This is my platform. The way a Java developer will say, I'm building a Java application, or Android, or iOS, right? The closest cloud native actually got to that is with Red Hat OpenShift, I would say, which can claim to be a massively successful developer platform built on container native technology. I think it's $1 billion a year or more as a business. But it's also very focused on, it's a very lucrative niche, but it's still a niche, big heavyweight software at big companies, like that OpenAI doesn't run its stuff on freaking Red Hat OpenShift, right? So what's their platform? What do they run it on? Well, they built their own. They built their own factory. All the best teams do, right? Like who's supporting them, basically? Who's giving them like the system primitives to build that kind of software?
Do you know?
Basically, we stopped working on that problem. Like when Docker stopped leading the community in applying container tech to modern software, I think we just all collectively stopped working on it. We're still we're still writing Docker files and Docker Compose files, and that's basically, and then everything else is back to fragmented, specialized platforms like use Vercel or Cloudflare or Google Cloud Run or Firebase, but that's not a cohesive platform, So I think we're sort of backsliding into the kinds of problems that Docker was meant to solve, because it solved it at one layer, but hasn't kept up with the accumulating layers of tech that we're all building up, right? So Dagger aims to solve that. We're trying to propose a solution in the spirit of the original Docker. Here's a way to leverage all this amazing tech that actually you can program on. You can use as your operating system. Like here's an SDK, here are APIs.
Do you know? I was calling it a workbench, right? To my team. But now that you said operating system, that's exactly how it feels. Like I've got everything I need to create that factory, right? To package up that app and get it shipped,
right?
And
we don't market it as an operating system, because when you say operating system, immediately a frame comes up. You expect certain things. So I don't think it's an appropriate marketing term for us. It's not a product category that like buyers can associate with us with. So that's what makes this so interesting and also challenging. We're sort of sneaking an operating system into a CI tool. That's kind of what Dagger is mostly understood to be. Like, oh, this is a tool that will make my CI better because it uses containers and I can program it with the language of my choice. And it runs locally, and I'll just save so much time. But once you start doing that, we have a whole open source community of engineers who realize, oh, wow, I can do a lot more than that. This is just the beginning. And then they join our Discord, and they just sort of devise all these strategies for solving more problems with Dagger. And that's the fun part. That's where the open source community part becomes so important, because it's not just the Dagger team in a room somewhere, just scheming. We're like, there's a few thousand people scheming all together as a community. So we're out there iterating on designs and new applications of Dagger, and in this mindset of we're building a new kind of operating system, and looking for niche applications to grow it. And that's what led us to this whole AI agent application. Right now, people are building AI agents on top of Dagger because the community figured out, oh, AI agents are mostly workflows, and Dagger is great at running workflows. Let's try running workflows with LLM loops inside of the workflow. What would happen? Turns out it works great, and it's really fun.
Yeah, I saw that. So I encourage anybody to go and check out the website, Dagger.io. There's a brew casket ready to go, get you up and running. But there's also Dagger Cloud as well, which is straight away is free, right, for an individual use, so you can get yourself up and running with that. But even to your point, it's when the community takes over and starts inventing user cases to see how far they can push your I think that warrants, that validates the success of something, right? If other people are able to go away and do things that you didn't even think of doing, right, with the original idea, I think it warrants it, right? It's going to be great, right?
Yeah, it's like Lego. I mean, Lego.
Perfect.
I think it's used a lot as an analogy. You can click things together, but I mean it in a very specific, deep way. That Lego is a really hard design and engineering problem. To design the Lego system took a long time, and they really struggled. And now it's protected by I don't know how many thousands of patents. And to this day, there are clones, but they're not as good. You can tell the difference. Because you need to get just the right material, just the right process, just the right, connection system that it's strong enough that you can scale, but not so strong that it's a pain in the ass to click together. There's so many micro innovations that you would never imagine, but it has insanely high leverage. Like, you're an engineer and you're designing the next brick, and then there's an exponential curve of applications of that brick combined with all the other bricks, right? So that's basically what we're doing. We're building Lego for this specific kind of software that needs a Lego system because it's not monolithic in nature; it's modular in nature. A workflow, the boxes and arrows. It's all about connecting new boxes with new arrows. So you can't just ship a monolithic tool and say, that's it. That's the perfect workflow system. It's done. No, all you can do is give people the building blocks to assemble boxes and arrows in a million different ways. So it's you need a community for that. There's a specific playbook for doing that. You can't build Lego in a vacuum. Who's good? Lego without people building on top of it is useless, right?
Sure, right, and that's where the creative juices get flowing as well, right? With the community, right? So
we need to see people building stuff with it to realize, oh no, this brick is totally wrong, or what would be great? The brick that does, that's shaped like this, and then within an hour of thinking about it, we're getting real world feedback from people who are experts at our system saying, yeah, that's pretty cool, but what if you added like a laser on the side or whatever, because I've got this thing I've been trying to build and I'm missing, and you do that. The fact that it's within hours and not within days or weeks or months, which is very standard for a lot of product companies, these loops can get long before you realize it. It's a massive advantage, and it makes it so fun for engineers. We got people who in our Discord that are running Dagger on thousands of nodes for hundreds of actual engineers in production, and they're in there, and sometimes we run something by them and we get feedback within an hour. Sometimes they raise their hand and say, we got an issue, and then they'll get a patch release within the day, you know. So everyone's happy. You can't beat that.
That's what I noticed as well, right? Like how fluid the feedback loop and how, like, such as yourself, right? Like I joined the Dagger Discord, like just thinking it was just the community platform, but that's actually where you run your internal comms, right,
Yes.
for the organization.
Yeah, no, that's a
right?
good point. It's important that's a really important point that when I say our Discord, it's our community Discord, you know. But also it's there's no separate private Slack. Like you said, the Dagger team, there's about 25 of us. We work out of the same Discord. We have a few private channels, of course, but we're literally hanging out in the same space as our community all the time. And you would think it's a small symbolic thing, but it makes a world of difference. And that's just kind of our approach to everything.
Remove the barriers.
Yeah.
Right? Immediately.
Yeah.
Which, as we know, right, we've seen the communities over the years, right? Like, getting their buy-in is probably one of the hardest things to achieve. But then they're loyal, right? As soon as they feel like they've got a good relationship, right, with builders and developers such as yourself, right, for the platform, like the buy-in's pretty critical there, right? And I think having that feedback loop is going to keep you honest as well, right? So
there's so many benefits to it. I think there's always benefits if you're a very engineering focused company. For some products, it's even more than that. It's the only way to do it. It's not possible to survive without doing it that way. And I think Dagger is one of those because it's so, like we said, it's Lego, it's modular. So what you build on it is the product. It's only as good as what people are building on it. So there's that feedback loop. Also, Dagger is new. You know, it's a new way to do CI, for example, and you know, it's you can retrofit it into your existing CI. It runs on top of GitHub Actions, GitLab, Jenkins, etc. So you can do it very gradually, but still, it's not a product that you sign up for. You send invites to a bunch of people like a SaaS business, and then you're onboarded. Or it's an app that you install, you double click. It's a system that you have to adopt. And so we need someone on site. We need a champion. For Dagger to be successful, there needs to be at least one person who gets it at such a level that they're willing to invest the time to integrate it. And we make it as easy as possible and as incremental as possible, but still they got to do it. And they're never going to do it unless they're emotionally invested and they know exactly how it's going to benefit them. And also they know that we have their back. You know, it can't be purely transactional. Like I do this work and then this problem will be solved. For this kind of investment, it's got to be, it's also emotional because you're sort of betting on the platform. You know, you're sort of, you're making an investment. You know, you're not just buying a thing and plugging it in and forgetting about it. You're making an investment and how you're going to work. You're also putting your credibility on the line a little bit because you have to go tell the rest of your team, hey, this is going to be great. You know, it's worth it. So if you don't have the whole community system that we talked about just before, you know, you're not going to be motivated enough to go through with it.
I completely agree. Again, like we're running a Dagger night next month to bring it to the masses. I know, right? I literally go over to dagger.io, go and try it out because now we can't actually look back or turn back because we've got it as part of our engineering processes, right? So, and we're going to be doing Dagger Night Hackathon here in Western Canada, and there's going to be a load of people. I think we've got like 60 to 80 people already signed up for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, we just had a hack night on Wednesday in San Francisco. It was our first in San Francisco, and yeah, it's so much fun. Just building things together. I love it.
In a safe place as well, right? Like that's the whole idea of it. So yeah, go and join the Discord. Like I'm one of those, like if I don't know something, I'll go and join their community Slack and watch what other people ask and then go, oh, I didn't think of that, right? That's a really good way to start as well, right? So
Yeah, to anyone who's listening who's interested in these kinds of problems, application delivery, the software factory, DevOps, platform engineering, whatever you want to call it, like on the technical level, and you feel like we shouldn't accept the current status quo, it's not good enough, then you should definitely join that Discord, regardless of whether you actually use Dagger, the product. I mean, I would love for you to try it, but that community is just, it's like a support group for that kind of, for DevOps people who want to improve their stack, that who think a better DevOps stack is possible. They're not ready to give up.
The dream is real, right?
The dream is real. Yeah.
The dream is real. I think that was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate your insights. I just want to wrap up with a couple of questions. Again, for all those, DevOps engineers, platform engineering, if you want to call it that, right? I know there's a bit of a debate online around that at the moment. I call everyone developers now. I say it's a room full of infrastructure folks. Like, you're all going to become developers, right? You see the whites of their eyes, but it happened to me, right? What top 3 skills, or what top 2 skills would you say? If someone's in career, right? What should they try and focus on for 2025?
I mean, one would just be it's not I think of it as a skill, but it's not a specific language or a specific tool. It's just building things as quickly as possible and getting as much practice as possible continuously. I think that in itself is a skill. Not waiting to know the theory perfectly, not waiting for the perfect project with the perfect use case. Just developing the habit of always be building something. Doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter if it's like a toy project. Always be building something, and that's the most valuable skill you can develop, in my opinion, because it compounds so much. Doesn't matter if you're gonna do a startup or apply for your dream job, try to get promoted, change career tracks. If it's technical in any way, you're already ahead if you've been doing that. And the more you do it, the more it accelerates. It really does compound, because you're up against an ocean of people who don't do that. They talk, they read, they're probably really smart, but you drop them in and they can't build it as fast because they haven't been practicing.
Walk
so
the walk,
I
right?
would say never stop doing that. That's the number one thing.
I couldn't agree more. That's all I've ever done, right? Is, at least if you're doing it on, the side of your desk, it's a safe place and you can make the mistakes, right? But it's your point. There's always something that when you're going through that process, you're learning stuff, and it's like compounds itself immediately, right? Because you'll come across things that if you are waiting for that project, right? Like, that's going to have a user case, and it's going to be hopefully scoped, right? Or I mean, these things change all the time, but to your point, sometimes go in, freestyle.
Yeah,
you just come across things, right?
Just the rate, the clock speed is important. Just always building something at maximum clock speed. Then I guess another skill would be, just in the same vein, not a specific tool or language, because those change so fast anyway, but just understanding systems, understanding the layer below. And that's just also a mindset, I think. Like, there's the trajectory between someone who just builds just enough understanding of how it works to get the task done, will not be as successful as someone who learns also how the surrounding layers work. You can never learn how all the layers work, but over time, if you develop the interest, you can actually develop a lot of range, and range is valuable. But at least start with the layer just below the one you're building on. If you're building a web app, understand how a web server works. If you're developing a web server, understand how the operating system works. If you're developing an operating system, understand how the hardware works, or at least the hypervisor or whatever. You get what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying.
Just develop curiosity on the components around you in the stack and act on it. Like, go learn. And might feed your funnel of things to build from the first skill, right? Like a little side project. Oh, that's how Kubernetes works. Oh, let me try and build something on top of Kubernetes, whatever. But you should always be pushing yourself in that way. I think that those things are more important than the actual list of languages and tools that you learn, because those,
they come and go.
Yeah,
right?
They come and go, exactly.
Yeah, they do. I say that to people all the time. Like, it's even like cloud services, they come and go. Right.
And the third one, that's going to be so trite, it makes me cringe, but I think AI agents are actually really important. And I think especially for this audience, I'm sure there's eyes rolling, because systems people deal with a lot of they actually have to deal with the consequences of hype cycles. An app dev who's happily at the top of the stack can jump on the next bandwagon framework and database bandwagon and have a great time, and then ship it over and then move on to the next thing. But there's someone's going to be stuck running it for the natural life of the service, and that usually that's systems people, platform people. So there's a natural, healthy skepticism. And I'm not going to say this particular framework or technology or whatever. I'm not even going to say that for Dagger. But you should totally check it out. No, I'm just kidding. But really, there's something there that's like, some waves are bigger than others. There's cycles, and you start your career somewhere in a cycle, and then you observe sort of where in the cycle you are. And I think I've had that experience where I started, around 2006, let's say, when I graduated, and it was just the beginning of the cloud computing wave. Like, it hadn't really started yet. It was just the very beginning. AWS was barely a thing. And then very quickly it took off. And so for a long time, I felt like, wow, that's my cycle. Like, I've been riding this cloud computing cycle. And it is, right? It was a pretty long and big one, obviously. But I think now I'm realizing, so I felt like, I started at the beginning of a cycle, cloud computing. But actually, I think that was just sort of a mid-tier cycle within a bigger cycle that was, let's say, the internet. Web, internet, I don't know. But like a bigger one, that cloud computing is a continuation of. Even Docker containers, it's a continuation of Linux. It only worked because it was compatible with Linux in the first place. So you start realizing, my wave is like, you zoom out. Like, my wave was actually like a downstream from a bigger wave. Okay, when's the next big wave? I think honestly, AI agents are it. Obviously LLMs. I'm not saying anything groundbreaking. Hopefully, I'm just validating that it's not just hype. There's a legitimate disruption in the software stack that is going to sweep through everything, including cloud native, systems engineering, infrastructure, UX, data engineering, design, product management. It doesn't matter where you are in the stack. It's going to sweep through. And for that reason, I'm just going to list that as a third skill. Like, now's the time, And it's really fun stuff as a technologist. It's really fun to build on. But you gotta, perfect if you're young and you were eager to learn new stuff anyway, because you know nothing. So like, might as well learn all the new things. If you're further along in your career, it's tougher, to be honest. That's where developing the other two skills help. Because if you were going to learn new parts of the stack anyway, and you're always building stuff anyway, you develop this habit of learning new stuff and embracing them. I'm just saying, I think it's going to be really important to do that. So if you're not doing it, maybe push yourself a little bit. Like, weekends coming up, maybe pick a course or pick a project and just start playing with it. And you'll be glad.
They were awesome. That was fantastic. Some really good points of view there. Some really great insights. And I really liked it because you didn't actually lock in on something specific. It was more about mindset and approach, right? Which, yeah, I think that'll make you, if you're trying to adopt, I mean, 2 out of 3 of those, the first two, I feel like that's going to serve you well, right? You're on a quest for knowledge, right? When it comes to engineering and all that kind of good
Yeah.
stuff. So my closing question is, and I asked this of all my guests, Solomon, and I sort of preempted you to it at the beginning. I like to sort of end it on a bit of a humorous note and a bit of a background, but what's your favorite operating system of all time? And you can't say Dagger.
I was not going to say Dagger, but yeah, I don't think we've earned the right to say that we have built an operating system. For now, I'm going to stick to saying we are in the process of building one. Okay. Yeah, I think honestly, I mean, we talked about childhood memories, but it's hard to beat, the nostalgia of the stuff you used at a young age. But I was a Mac maniac as a kid.
Really?
Yeah, like the like the underdog Apple, right? When I was a teenager, Apple was done.
Oh yeah, it wasn't
done
popular,
for. It was
right?
like,
Yeah.
It was not a cool. It was uncool to say something like Apple will be successful. And I was, as a teenager, you're attracted to being the underdog, And my father's a musician; he had a Mac. And so I grew up, with the frustration of having a computer that did not have any of the latest and greatest video games. And I read all the magazines, I followed all the launches, and I would argue in school, middle school, over Mac versus PC. I actually got in a fight once. I mean, the only fight I've ever been in at school ever was over Mac versus PC, which is so funny. But yeah, so, that was the golden age of, they didn't call it Mac OS back then, but, System 7, System 8.
Was it OS X? Is that what they used
No,
to
it was
call it?
before that. Yeah,
Right.
and then OS X came out, of course, and that was a huge deal, and I was all over that, like parroting the talking points and whatever. But yeah, I would say the golden era for me was just before that. Like the the new version 8.5 would come out, and the icons would look different. You could have themes. It was just cool. It was welcoming. It was a welcoming operating system that you can tweak, but you wouldn't fall in. Like you couldn't fall all the way to the bottom. There were guardrails, so I enjoyed that feel. And then later got into Linux, of course, and that was fun too.
See, I love those stories, and I I had similar arguments on the playground, but I think it was like Windows versus something else, right? Yeah. So it all depends, right?
I'm just glad I got it out of my system early to just blindly follow a company and whatever it's doing. Then you develop over time. I think you develop enough distance that you can be loyal to a brand and to a community, but not blindly loyal, right? Just use your brain and
use your brain. I love that.
Yeah, use your brain.
That's a top tip there, right?
Use your brain and your heart in equal measure.
I know, right? Well, I admired Mac for years. I got one last year. It's my first ever one. So
I see a Macintosh in your background.
I'm a big fan. And do you know? People can't see it, right? You're listening in, but like I saw it on a marketplace for like $100. If I'm gonna get that, restore it, and it even has that smell of like the old plastic casing. From the 90s, right? And it still boots up, and yeah, I'm sort of going down memory lane a little bit there, like the whole mechanical keyboards and trying to source parts for it and having to solder things, and people are like, why are you doing all this stuff? But it just takes you back to a time where that's when you start entering into tech. Those are your first moments, right? The perception of viewing different technologies growing up. And I just feel like it's such a good journey. But yeah, Solomon, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I absolutely love the stories, the insights. I feel like our community will too. Again, I can't talk about Dagger enough. Like, it's go and try it. Dagger.io, right? Get involved.
Thank you. I appreciate the support.
It's accelerating our engineering times, right? So shipping faster, right, is always a benefit. So
Always.
I appreciate it.
Always.
Okay, so thank you very much, and yeah, we'll catch everybody on the next one.
Thanks for having me.
Goodbye for now.